So we're looking at a model of bone tissue from the diaphysis of a long bone. So when we look at the outside edge, remember that bone is covered by a connective tissue called the periosteum. So we're seeing the periosteum as this gray structure here. Then remember, the periosteum can be divided into two layers: the outer fibrous layer that we're seeing here and the inner osteogenic layer that we're seeing against the bone here. What keeps the periosteum in contact with the bone are these root-like extensions called Sharpie's fibers that extend into the bone material. So what we're looking at here is an array of compact bone that would make up most of the diaphysis. As we get toward the inner part of the bone, particularly in the metaphysis, what we would find is to the inside of compact bone we would find spongy bone. So what we're seeing here are the trabeculae of spongy bone, and then the gray material covering those trabeculae in the open spaces in here is the endosteum of the bone. Now, as you'll recall, compact bone is constructed by repeated units that we call osteons. So at the center of an osteon, we have a Haversian canal, and then typically the Haversian canal would have a vascular network within it, would also have blood supply, lymph supply. So each of these larger holes represents a Haversian canal at the center of an osteon. The osteoblasts that lay down this osteon develop in rings that go around this Haversian canal. So these openings are lacuna, where cells would be housed. And as the osteoblasts lay down matrix, they lay down matrix that would fill in these spaces, which we call lamellae. And the lamellae that goes around, that is in an osteon that goes around the Haversian canal, are called concentric lamellae. So we're seeing repeated concentric lamellae here. If we move down to this one, they've tried to put the osteoblasts or osteocytes back in place, and so the little brown things are the cells themselves. And then remember that within this compact bone, because the matrix is so dense, that the cells retain little connections to one another. So the spider-like legs we're seeing here represent the canaliculi connecting these rings of osteoblasts and then eventually osteocytes together. So remember that compact bone is replenished through a remodeling process. So while we see these complete osteons, we also see fragments of old osteons that we see in different places as we look at this model. So remember, the concentric lamellae occur in the osteon. The fragments of old concentric lamellae are called interstitial lamellae. So we see interstitial lamellae here. And then what they've tried to do with this model is pull up these rings of bony matrix, or the concentric lamellae, so you can see that they're sequential repeated rings. Now, when a bone grows in diameter, the growth occurs from the periosteum here, and we lay down new layers of bone just inside the periosteum. So since this bone would go all the way around the diaphysis, then these lamellae that they've pulled up here and the ones we see repeated through here are called circumferential lamellae. Since they're on the outside of the bone, we refer to them as outer circumferential lamellae. And then again, we can see lacuna associated with these lamellae. We can see the osteoblasts or osteocytes here with their little cytoplasmic extensions, canaliculi, that we can see as well. Now, if we move toward the inside of the bone here, then when we remodel the outside, we also remodel the inside of the bone. And so we have several layers of bone that we can see here, where the lamellae were going around the medullary cavity that would be to the inside. So since these lamellae go around the medullary cavity, they're referred to as inner circumferential lamellae. So when we look at this model, we can see outer circumferential lamellae, we can see interstitial lamellae, we can see concentric lamellae, and then we can see inner circumferential lamellae. And then as we look at the spongy bone, the layers of bone that develop in trabeculae are also interstitial lamellae. So that's the lamellae that's shared between compact bone and spongy bone. Now when we look at the sides of the model, then we can see how the vascular network is all interconnected. So since the osteons are running on this plane, then these are all representing different Haversian canals. Where blood vessels enter the bone leaves a small hole that we would call a nutrient foramen. And then these are Voetmann's or perforating canals that interconnect between the Haversian canals. So if we turn the model around, we can see that same pattern, but they've removed the vascular network so that you can actually see that they're canals. So again, the ones running on this plane would be Haversian canals. The ones running across between them would be Voetmann's or perforating canals. Now this next model represents one of these osteons that's been pulled out and enlarged. So when we look at it, again, we would start at the center with a Haversian canal, and in the Haversian canal we would find blood vessels, lymph, nerves, and then again the cells divide and form rings of cells. In this instance, the red things are the cells. The little red things connecting between the cells are the canaliculi connecting the cells. That's critical for diffusion because diffusion is occurring out of this blood vessel system here. And if we had to diffuse through this matrix, it would be very hard to get it to the outside cells. So the fact that the cells are all interconnected means we can diffuse through a more aqueous environment within the cytoplasm of the cell instead of this much denser lamellae that's formed. So again, since the lamellae are going around the Haversian system, we call these concentric lamellae around this Haversian system. And if you look from the outside, they've tried to show you again the interaction between the cells, osteoblasts or osteocytes, and the little canaliculi that connect all these cells together into a pattern. The knee joint is one of the few joints that we will be looking at in detail. And the knee joint, from a clinical standpoint, is a good joint for students to understand because the knee is structured in a way that it's easily damaged, and hence the joint that we see the most frequently damaged is a knee joint. So when we look at the knee, remember that the knee is an interaction between the upper bone in the lower extremity, the femur, and the two lower bones in the lower extremity, which would be represented by the large bone here, the tibia, and then the smaller bone to the side, the fibula. So the structures that are involved are these two flat surfaces on the femur, which are called condyles. And since, if you'll recall, that the tibia is medial and the fibula is lateral, then this is the medial condyle and the lateral condyle. And then recall that on the posterior surface we have a depression between those two condyles that we call the intercondycular notch or fossa. We have two flat surfaces on the tibia as well, the medial condyle and the lateral condyle that these condyles interact with. And then if we review that on a real bone, we have these two flat surfaces that we call condyles. Then we have this elevation between the two flat surfaces, which is the intercondycular eminence. And this is going to be important to attachment that maintains the structure of the knee joint. So when we look at this model, this tissue here represents soft tissue. So remember that what connects bone to bone is a ligament, and then what connects muscle to bone is a tendon. And so what we're seeing here is that we have two ligaments on the outside of the knee, one that goes from the medial epicondyle of the femur to the tibia, and then one that goes from the lateral epicondyle of the femur to the fibula. And so these have had two names traditionally. one describing the bone at which it attaches, the other the directional term for its direction. So this is called the medial collateral ligament because it's on the medial side of the knee, or some people call it the tibial collateral ligament because it attaches to the tibia. So the acronym for the medial collateral ligament would be MCL, and then the acronym for the tibial collateral ligament would be TCL. As we turn it around to this one, then because it's on the lateral aspect, it's been referred to as the lateral collateral ligament, which is LCL, or because it attaches to the head of the fibula, the fibular collateral ligament, which would be FCL. Now, what maintains the connection between the two internally are these ligaments that are internal, and they arise off of that intercondylar eminence that we just talked about. So on the anterior surface, we have the anterior collateral ligament, or anterior cruciate ligament, or ACL. And then if we look posteriorly, we have one on the posterior surface, which is the posterior collateral ligament, or the PCL. When we look at ligaments, the most commonly damaged ligament is this anterior ligament, the ACL, and it gets torn because of stress on the knee. Now, because the bone doesn't provide a very big lip on which the condyles are going to ride, we use soft tissue to increase the lip that we would see here. So internally, the soft tissue that helps create a socket in which the condyles are going to set are these two pads sitting here. And see, these are pads of fibrocartilage that we refer to as meniscus. So the one on the medial side here is the medial meniscus, and the one on the lateral side is the lateral meniscus. So if somebody says they tore the cartilage in their knee, then they either tore the MCL here or the ACL over here. Now, with this model, because it's more flexible with wire, we can see that the cruciate ligaments get their name because they actually cross. So we're seeing the posterior cruciate here, and we're seeing the back of the anterior cruciate here. We can see how they cross. And then again, here's our lateral collateral ligament and our medial collateral ligament. And if we do it on the inside here, we can see how the ACL crosses on the inside. So what we normally have on the front of our knee is a patella. And the patella is an attachment for the large muscles of the thigh. So this big tendon coming down to the patella is referred to as the quadriceps tendon. And then this, connecting the patella to the tibial tuberosity, is the patellar ligament. So anytime we have ligaments and tendons where they can rub against bone, we put material underneath them to prevent that from happening. So we have several packets of synovial fluid that we would find in our knee, which are called bursa. So we would have a bursa that would cover the front surface of our patella to protect it, which would be the prepatellar bursa. We would have a bursa found underneath this ligament to protect it, which would be the inferior patellar bursa. And we would have a bursa up here under this tendon, which would be the superior patellar bursa. And those bursa would be pockets of synovial fluid that are designed to decrease friction within the joint when these ligaments and tendons are being stretched and pulled by muscle.